Not everyone who was killed in Vietnam died in Vietnam. I think you know from my past broadcasts that I've been looking for my old crew members and the guys that served in my unit, whether they were in my crew or not. Guys that were in the Dong Ha River Security Group and River Division 543, anybody stationed at NSA, Naval Support Activity Detachment at Qua Viet. Any of the guys I met on the LCUs, the YFUs, that brought supplies up from Da Nang to Dong Ha and then back down again on a return trip carrying broken tanks and blown up amphibious armored vehicles and rotating Marine units. Members of the 1st Marine Division that I fought with. Lewis, ladies and gentlemen, was with the 1st Marine Division in I Corps. He was a recon. Marine recons are probably the best trained fighting force on the face of this earth when viewed as a legitimate infantry military unit. A recon is sort of the Marine version of the Navy SEALs. But don't make the mistake of comparing the two. Because if you do, you're going to get into a fight with one or the other, and you don't want to do that, I can assure you. Lewis was a lance corporal, and he was in charge of his team when it was assigned to my boat. That's how I met him. I went down to go on patrol that evening and was told that I would be assigned a Marine recon team from then on out. And the teams rotated. It wasn't always the same team. But the first team that was assigned to my boat was headed by a lance corporal whose name was Louis Perillo. Now, I never got to know him really well because you tried not to do those things. Sometimes you couldn't help it and you became good friends with someone. And the reason you tried not to do it is because people died over there, and they died all the time, and you never knew who was going to be next. So you sort of insulated yourself. But he was a good man, he was a smart man, and he was a good soldier. He was a good Marine. I remember that about him very well. He had the respect of his men. He had my respect. When he was under my command, he performed flawlessly. I always called him Lewis or Lance Corporal, depending upon who was listening and what we were doing. His men, I remember, called him Einstein because he was so smart. He was on my boat for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then his team rotated, and I never saw him again. But I remembered him, and I was searching for him on the internet, and I just learned today that a few years ago, he committed suicide. I found a family member who sent me this poem that he wrote while he was in Vietnam and sent to his mother. You see, folks, not everybody who was killed in Vietnam died in Vietnam. I know the war killed Lewis. I know that. And when I first started reading this poem, I couldn't get through it. And I may have some problems now getting through it, but if I do, please bear with me, because I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it for Lewis. And I want you to listen to this, because you're going to discover his heart and his mind and his bottomless, never-ending compassion and love for his fellow soldiers. He sent this to his mother. He wrote it in Vietnam. I haven't even started, and I can feel the emotion welling up in my chest. Here's what he wrote. Dear Mom, this was my best that day. Dear Mom, I held him in my arms like a father holding his newborn son, proud and afraid. I was afraid that he would die before I had a chance to tell him what he needed to hear. He looked up at me and smiled, trusting me, believing in my strength and courage, believing that I could carry him to safety. I lied to him. I told him fairy tales, stories I heard as a child. He looked at me and listened, his eyes filled with wonder and hope. He was innocent and pure, a child cradled in the arms of weakness and doubt, swaddled in trembling fear and desperation. His eyes closed slowly, and his arm slipped off my shoulder. It hung limp and lifeless at my side. His body draped over my arms like a green shroud. Relaxed and rested, shed its bone-tired weariness and final fear. He was asleep, peaceful, eternal sleep. He was no longer troubled by the thoughts of war, the fear of death. I laid him on the ground in a soft bed of blood-red dirt. I removed my flak jacket and placed it under his head for comfort. I pulled a canteen from a pouch on my web belt, unscrewed the cap, and poured some over my fingers. I touched his eyes, hands, and boots with my wet fingers and mumbled this simple prayer. I give up to you this innocent child's God. My arms are tired. He is too heavy for me to carry. Forgive this man and take him to his final resting place beside you. I scooped up a handful of dirt and sprinkled it over his body, burying him deep in my memory. Like me, Mom, he is just 18, alone and frightened and afraid of dying. That fear is over. A voice called. I picked up my rifle and ran for cover. This was my best that day, Mom. Your son, Lance Corporal Louis Perillo, United States Marine Corps, 1st Division, Vietnam, 1969. Day is done, gone the sun, from the lakes, from the hills, from the sky. All is well, safely rest, God is nigh. Fading light dims the sight, and a star gems the sky, gleaming bright. From afar, drawing nigh, falls the night. Thanks and praise for our days, 'neath the sun, 'neath the stars, 'neath the sky. As we go, this we know, God is nigh.